Welcome to the Irish NFL Show Super Wildcard Weekend Preview in association with our partner QuinBet. And after the Curate's Egg, which is week 18 of the regular season, we got no dead rubbers this weekend. There's going to be no starters rested, including ourselves. We're all action. Chiefs and the Lions get to put their feet up, of course, because that's their reward for securing the number one seeds in their respective conferences. The 12 other teams that made the playoffs are now playing Survive and Advance. That starts with Chargers-Texans Saturday night Irish time at 9:30. Ends just before dawn on Tuesday morning as the Vikings take on the Rams. That game, by the way, may yet be moved from SoFi Stadium in Inglewood to the Cardinal Stadium at Glendale, Arizona. That's the backup plan the NFL has because of the wildfires impacting on LA and the surrounding area at the moment. And on that note, our thoughts, of course, with all of those impacted by the fires, including the NFL community. We have some very regular Irish NFL Show subscribers in the area and many contributors in and around the LA area as well. And we hope them and their families and indeed everybody in the area stays safe throughout the ongoing disaster. Good evening to all of you listening and tuning in via X, Facebook, Twitch, and also via our website, theIrishNFLShow.com, if you want to tune in that way for future reference. If you're watching back on YouTube after the fact, or you're listening back Friday or Saturday ahead of the games on the podcast, you're very welcome too. Please do remember to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Brian O'Leary, Noel Downing, and Kieran O'Donovan joining myself, Conor Brophy, this evening. Kieran, of course, the only one with actual skin in the game as his Packers take on the Philadelphia Eagles over the weekend, looking to avenge their week one loss in Brazil and progress to the divisional round. That's one of the games we'll check in on. But before we get to the action, let's jump back on the coaching carousel momentarily, because news out of Las Vegas is that general manager Tom Telesco has followed the coach Antonio Pierce out of town there. Brian, it's a revolving door in the GM role in particular in Vegas. Never mind the coaching side of things. Telesco now is the third general manager in 6 seasons that they've had. He only just out the door at LA at the Chargers into Vegas for a year, and it didn't last.
No, but I would suggest it's the right decision, Connor. I think it doesn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense today when Antonio Pierce was relieved of his duties that they weren't following suit in terms of the departure of a GM. I think they're more aligned to having, if you read the reports that come out in the last hour, they want to have a GM and a head coach in lockstep with one another, and that makes absolute total sense. It was one of those situations where I could see GM remains in situ, a head coach potentially being forced on him. And that's not really what you want. You want to start fresh and you want to go again. And I know it's a topsy-turvy world as the Raiders fan, continuous chop and change, but I do ultimately think it's the right decision to kind of balance the books essentially and go again and try and find the right fit, because it hasn't worked over the course of the last 4 or 5 years.
You say that, but 1 year isn't a long time to, what, as they said, the statement, build a foundation. Like, Telesco gets one draft, he's one head coach that he didn't even really hire himself. Like, that's not great in terms of what it says about how Vegas runs its affairs. It doesn't make it the most attractive option for any GM worth his salt who might be considering going there.
True. I suppose it's probably the magnitude of, they can reflect on his time and maybe with the Chargers as well and certain things that went on there. I think there's probably a bigger picture. I would say they
just don't like him because he's the guy who hired Brandon Staley. Let's be honest.
We interviewed Tom Telesco. He's very courteous and very generous with his time, and he was a great interview. So I will put him on the likable list. They had the best player in the draft. Let's be fair. He drafted the best player. Although you could argue, if we remember that night in April when we were down in Cork, it was probably the quickest selection of a player throughout the course of those 32 players that were selected, because they knew they were onto a good thing when he fell to them. But he's been a fantastic player. I suppose he could hang his hat on that and say, look what I brought in. But ultimately, the roster building last offseason wasn't good enough. They've been really poor. The other Kieran called out very early on last offseason when we were doing our kind of AFC West wildcard. He couldn't see anything but a bad season for this Raiders team, and it's transpired that way. And ultimately, he's paid the penalty. It'll be interesting to see what happens to him now. That's the problem now. He's had 2 cracks at it within the same division that he probably has to go back and do maybe a minor role in the background before he gets an opportunity again. For Antonio Pierce, didn't come as a surprise. I always felt he was out of his depth. It kind of strikes me of how bad things were under Josh McDaniels, that they had that initial upward lift last year where they won on Christmas Day in Kansas City, but ultimately we haven't really seen much there, and it's been quite evident over the course of the season that he's been out of his depth, and he's been suggested as a defensive coordinator. I'm not entirely sure even that's the right role for him. Maybe he needs to take a step back as well.
Yeah, another long off season for the Raiders, as it is for the other 17 teams that are watching from the outside. But let's get to the teams that are actually still involved in meaningful action. Kicks off on Saturday at 9:30. We've all the AFC games out of the way before we even get an NFC playoff game this weekend. But the first one up, Noel, is Chargers taking the trip to Houston to play the Texans. Chargers 3-point favorites on this one. Now, Chargers have won 6 games on the road this year, so that's kind of justified considering really where the Texans have been at this year. We thought this was a Houston team that was going to take an even bigger leap forward after the CJ Stroud breakout season, first season for rookie head coach D'Amico Ryans, Bobby Slowick, enchanting people with that spectacular offense last year. And we looked at them in the offseason and we thought, yeah, Stephon Diggs, that's a great addition. Joe Mixon Mixon's had a great season for them, to be fair. That'll give them the extra punch they were needing in the running game. And yet, they kind of look like they've been treading water to a certain degree. Now, that's not a bad thing to say when you get to the playoffs. A lot of people think that Houston are going to be dumped out at home. They'll probably see that as disrespectful. But is there a way they can upset the odds, do you think?
Yeah, look, absolutely. When we get into the playoffs, anything can happen in this kind of one and done format. But there is a worry with Houston. They are a team I picked to go to the Super Bowl at the start of the season. I mean, on paper, it looks like all the parts are there. We talked about CJ Stroud and the season he had. You know, Nico Collins had a fantastic season last year. We were thinking it was just going to be onwards and upwards from there. Tank Dell, unfortunately, got his injury last year, but he came back and he was a really exciting player. And you mentioned Stephon Diggs. We thought that would kind of just be that added piece that could give Stroud, you know, multiple options and they could continue kind of moving on from where they were last season. But it just hasn't been the case. I mean, there's a multitude of issues there. But one of the biggest glaring ones is an offensive line that has been disastrous, that has crumbled in front of them, has caused, you know, major problems for this team and has put them under pressure. And even the most talented quarterback, if they're running for their life constantly or they have very little time in the pocket when they have the ball, you know, after a while, there's only so much they can do and things start to break down. So for me, it's
a good point, Noel, because look, you and I have witnessed the far from great wall of Chicago that's been porous this year and had Caleb Williams running for his life all season. But it's quite an achievement for the Texans to have got to the playoffs and played as well as they have, quote unquote, because like not only has Stroud taken 54 sacks, which is monstrous in any season where you haven't had Caleb Williams taking 68, but they've also allowed more unblocked rushers than any other team in the league. That's madness.
It is. Look, and it is a testament to them that they've gone on and won the division. They've won 10 games and you know, they've finished top of that division and got to the playoffs. But it's still, when you get into this part of the season now, when you're going up against the top teams that have got in there, this is something you can't go forward with. This is something that teams will exploit. We look at the Chargers coming in. They have a good defense. I think they have 46 sacks on the season. So they could really put pressure on that O-line. They could really get after Stroud. And this is why I have no faith in this Texans team. I think it's very difficult to go through the season with this issue and then suddenly fix it in the playoffs. It's very hard against the Chargers team who have a bit of wind behind their backs there. And I think it's just going to cause the Texans too much issues this weekend.
Kieran, if you're looking for reasons to believe in the Texans, though, defensively they've been sneaky good this year. They're fifth in takeaways. They're third best against the run in terms of yards per carry, which is going to serve them well, you would hope, from their perspective against the Chargers. That's the D'Amico Ryans side of the house, and on that side of the ball, they've been surprisingly good. Although, as Noel said, it's only just about compensated for an offense that didn't take the strides forward that we hoped and expected that they would this year, based on what we saw last season.
Yeah, I think, look, defensively, you're right. That's been the more consistent and stronger side of the ball, and you can give D'Amico Ryans credit where credit is due there. But like, look, you mentioned on the offensive side of the ball, the talent that they have. You mentioned the big names, your Mixons there, and I mean, there's a lot of reasons to be hopeful there if you're a Houston Texans fan, because we all know once you get into the dance, once you get into the playoffs, it's new fun. It's a clean slate, and another reason to be hopeful as well is something that I see as maybe a bit of a concern for the Chargers is the running back situation. When you see them go out and sign Ezekiel Elliott as well this week, you're wondering about the health of Gus Edwards. He was becoming quite productive towards the back end of the season as well. I know J.K. Dobbins is coming off a big injury, and like, what's Ezekiel Elliott going to do to improve the situation? It seems like there might be a bit of a panic about the depth of the running game and how fit these guys are. So you'd wonder, is there a chance again for D'Amico Ryans to exploit that and the possible lack of a running game? But look, I was listening to the pod there that Brian had with Daniel Hussey the other morning, and he talked about Chargers charging, and the fact that Jim Harbaugh seems to have come in and done a job on that. And I just did a bit of reading up on Jim Harbaugh there. And if you look back, and if anything I've read about Lombardi, Chuck Noll, Parcells, Belichick, all these great coaches, they seem to have one thing in common. When they go in, the reason that they seem to have been able to change a culture is because they fixed the easiest thing. They established a culture by basing it on, sound fundamentals. And just reading up on Jim Harbaugh, he seems to be exactly right out of that book as well. And that trend transcends sport as well. I just think back to the Lions, in rugby, where Paul O'Connell addressed his Lions team years ago and said, let's be the best at the things that require no talent. So let's be the best at the absolute non-negotiables. And I think that's what Jim Harbaugh has done. And I think that's where the charging, for want of a better word, has been eliminated. And that breeds confidence as well. Another thing that Jim Harbaugh is, he's a big man on confidence. And despite personnel and when you've got your Nico Collins on the other side of the ball and your CJ Strouds and your Joe Mixons, I think it's the confidence that's gained by the fact that we're eliminating these simple mistakes, these habits of losing games that we've had in the bag. I think that's what's going to give the Chargers the edge this weekend in this game.
Brian, I jokingly referenced Tom Telesco and his time as GM when Brandon Staley was in charge at the Chargers, because he was the guy that you love to give a kicking to, and rightly so from week to week, because we lamented on an ongoing basis that a team that had Justin Herbert as quarterback, that a team that had the kind of talent that they have on both sides of the ball, would underperform week in, week out, season in, season out. And the Chargers did charger over and over again. As Kieran said, that's all swung around this season. This is a really balanced team. This is a team that's finally living up to its potential. And looking at the playoff bracket heading into the weekend and thinking, who's the team, trademark that you wouldn't want to face? And the Chargers probably are one that would sit in on that audition. Like, there's not a huge amount of weakness here. They're a team that will take some stopping, and I'm not necessarily sure that Houston is the team to do it.
Yeah, and referring to that podcast this week with Daniel, he kind of called out, and it's been well known, this audition when Harbaugh went to meet the Chargers, it wasn't just about how we could turn things around, it was about what was the mantelpiece what was the mantle in which he was putting in place, of how they were going to overcome the Chiefs. And ultimately, that's what it's all about in that division. And twice this season, we've seen them come very close, and people will say, oh, that's the Chargers of old. They've come close, but just not good enough. But over the course of the second half of the season, there was games where they were down by multiple points, and they found ways to come back. That Broncos game in particular, a huge victory on a Thursday night. And once the season was going in the right direction, that was very much the turning point. And the self-belief within this team since that particular game has transcended. Again, last weekend, down scores against the Raiders team that were struggling. And in the past divisional game, we've seen them kind of lose these games, and we refer to them as the Spurs or the Chargers. That wasn't the case. You never felt last weekend that was going to be the case. And that's how it kind of feels about this team. Years gone by, wildcard game a couple of years ago where they were up by multiple scores and they let that one slip in Jacksonville. It doesn't have that feel about this game, and we're looking at two teams right now that seem to be going in different directions. And I know we're coming off a Texans victory last weekend, but I'm not entirely sure we should be reading too much into a game against the Titans that were very much, I suppose I wouldn't say they were tanking, but it looked very evident earlier on. They weren't really too keen to play that particular game. It'd be interesting to see earlier on. No one calls it out, it's a clean slate come to playoffs, but it's very hard to book the trend when you haven't played well for 4 or 5 weeks to come in and be fresh and go again. A Chargers team that if they win and things go away, I imagine some of the picks are going to go here tonight. They'll get another chance to the Chiefs, and this is the team that were up by 2 scores against the Chiefs and took a late field goal in Arrowhead on a Monday night game for the Chiefs to get over them. Sometimes these quirky things happen where a team gets beaten twice in the season, close by, they come and play each other in the playoffs and they can turn it around it would be great from a neutral to see them play each other again next week. And I think that's the way it's going to play out, because I do have the Chargers winning this game. I wouldn't say comfortably, but I think they will get over the line.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've been trying to make the argument for the Texans myself. I think if they can do what they've been able to do a lot of games this season and shut down the run, that could make things interesting. Particularly Justin Herbert. You don't want Herbert taken off. He's a big asset, obviously, in the running game as well. He's not putting up the kind of gaudy numbers that we've seen from Lamar or from Josh Allen at times, but he's still so dangerous. Lad McConkey obviously is a serious weapon as well that the Texans are going to need to get their hands on. But I just don't see enough on the offensive side of the ball from the Texans, particularly with Tank Dell going down to that injury and Stephon Diggs unavailable. I just don't see the firepower there for them to progress. It's Chargers for me. Noel, what do you make?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. It's Chargers for me.
And Kieran, your pick?
Yeah, Chargers.
All right, Saturday night's all right for fighting, and we've got a divisional clash between the Steelers and the Ravens in Baltimore into Sunday morning, 1 a.m. That one kicks off. Ravens, the spread it's slightly narrowed over the course of today. Started off 9.5. They're down to 8.5, but that's still not giving the Steelers much of a chance. They're giving up over a touchdown there, according to the bookies. Brian, the Ravens had dropped the first game in the divisional home and away this season. It was a tight one, and Steelers prevailed. They nearly doubled them up though more recently, which might be the clearer indicator of where these two teams are at. The Steelers just slid into the playoffs. It's a long time since a team came in off the back of 4 losses. It's not where you want to be heading to a place like Baltimore, where the Ravens have been dominant this season. Again, it's one where you're struggling to make the case for a team. In this case, I think it's Pittsburgh.
Yeah, very much so. I interviewed Chris Adamski from Pittsburgh Tribune Review this week, and it was only 4 or 5 weeks removed since I last spoke to him. And on that particular podcast, they were talking about potentially being the 2 seed and a redemption story for Russell Wilson against the Broncos, who at that stage looked like they were locked in for the 7th seed. That's how it played out. By God, if things have turned around very quickly, the wheels have come off. And he spoke about this week about the night and day of a team that put 44 points up on a Bengals team on the road a couple of weeks ago, and that was the first episode of Hard Knocks. And we saw the frustrations of George Pickens in that game, despite the huge numbers. And then last weekend, they play against the Bengals again. They can't move the ball for three quarters. Pickens is held to, I think it was 1 catch. Mike Williams had that big catch down the sideline, but with the exception of that, there was nothing offensively going on for that. And it was a big shock to many a Steelers fan that they remained in that game for so long. And even though they had an opportunity to win the game, it's going to come down to defense in this game. That's how Chris kind of outlined it. It's going to have to be a similarity to what we saw the first time around earlier on in the season, where they got Lamar off kilter. I would say though, they did play.
To your point, Brian, like the focus rightly has been on the sputtering Pittsburgh offense and how Wilson in particular is flamed out, and the Pickens drops, and how disconnected the whole thing's starting to look right now. But that has overshadowed the fact that they also held the absolutely on fire Joe Burrow to a passer rating I think of under 80, held the Bengals to only 18 points. So when they show up on defense, they really do show up, which gives them a chance.
Yeah, and even in the game in Baltimore a couple of weeks ago on that Saturday night, there's defense by and large played well. There's points on the board that weren't there for the taking. Russell Wilson fumbles in the red zone. There's a pick 6 later on in the game, which kind of distorts the score. They win by 17 points. The Steelers were well in that game going into the 4th quarter, and defensively, even in that particular game, they play well. So yeah, there is an argument to say we have seen Lamar in AFC North clashes even this season in Cleveland. Struggle. They struggled in Pittsburgh. There was 6 field goals kicked by the Steelers. They still got over the line in that game. There is a recipe here where if Mike Tomlin schemes accordingly, he can get it done. But you've also seen over the course of the last month, and I think we all seen it coming, that there's been games this season where the Ravens have lost, but we knew come December they'd get it right and ultimately win the division. At one stage, they were 2 games back, and I still felt they were going to come and win that division. And it's a hard task. Look, we've been here before, these AFC North clashes. There's been 4 playoff games. Steelers have won 3 of them. They're always nip and tuck and tight. And I can see if Mike Tomlin can get the Ravens down to the level in which he'll want, there is a way of winning this game, but it looks like a very difficult one to overcome.
No, one of the keys to the game from both the Steelers' perspective and from a Ravens perspective is Derrick Henry. Obviously, slightly different perspectives there. The Steelers held Henry to under 90 yards when they won that game. Every game that Derrick Henry has run for over 90 yards, the Ravens have won this season. They're 10-0 when he gets galloping. He's a tough man to stop. We looked at the Ravens this time last year and thought that could be the thing that puts them over the top. And it's threatening to be that way this year if they get up ahead of steam in the playoffs.
No, absolutely. I mean, you said it. That's why they bring in a player like Derrick Henry. Almost 2,000 yards this season. 16 touchdowns. I mean, that's why you bring him in there. Obviously, you have Lamar then can complement it with his running skills. But yeah, Brian talked about the Steelers defense, and they really, really will need to be on top form against this offense now. The Steelers, as you mentioned, 4 defeats in a row. think the Ravens are 4 victories in a row. And as Brian said earlier as well, it's very hard to flip that switch when you're on that kind of a run. You know, there's a reason you're on that run. And it's this Pittsburgh offense at the moment, just it inspires no confidence whatsoever. And you have on the flip side, you have a Ravens team who feel like they've worked themselves into this kind of, you know, preseason or playoff form, and they're actually at the top of the game now, flying. And I think it's going to be very, very difficult for the Steelers. I think the defense has talent, but I don't know if it's going to be good enough to stand up against Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. Now, there is obviously a bit of hope, and I know Zay Flowers is out, so that's a player gone there. But Ian Andrews has been stepping up recently and getting touchdowns and making plays. So I think it's a Ravens offense that is flying at the moment, and it's a Pittsburgh Steelers team that is very, very low in confidence. And I think it's going to be a hard flip for them to turn it around against the Ravens. But again, as Brian says, it's a divisional game and anything can happen, but it's a difficult weekend this week for the Steelers.
Kieran, we've mentioned all those weapons on the Baltimore side. Mark Andrews, who I think is on a six-game touchdown streak at the moment. Derrick Henry, and we've talked at length about him. Lamar's been out of his mind, though, and you know there's two sides to this. There's the first side of it, which is he's thereabouts again in the MVP voting, it would seem, but also has this kind of albatross hanging around his neck that he doesn't get it done in the playoffs. And you slip up against the Steelers, who will be spoiling for the upset here, and you're under even more pressure next year. And you wouldn't underestimate how that might weigh on Lamar's shoulders heading into playoffs.
Yeah, in sport, it can be very hard to shake a narrative. I mean, you look at, again, I'm talking about other sports, but you look at Rory McIlroy when it comes to the majors. I mean, he can be lights out all season, and then it comes to those 4 competitions and he just can't seem to string four days together. That's the narrative now that Lamar is trying to shake off. And I know he played in an AFC Championship game last year, and they were competitive in it, but he's still got that, as you said, it's hanging over his shoulder. It's a monkey on his back, whatever metaphor you want to use. But I do think, look, I think it's important that the Ravens block out all that noise. I know Lamar has leaned into it this week a little bit, and you know, he hasn't shied away from it. He said he does get a bit antsy when it comes to the playoffs, and he has played a little bit differently. They need to block out that noise, and I think Derrick Henry is actually a big part of it. Not to overstate it, but it's almost like he's an extra comfort blanket now for Lamar Jackson. He's not under as much pressure to be the runner, even though he was breaking all-time rush records this year. But he's got that, and you mentioned the tight end system, the 2 tight ends that they have there in Andrews and Likely. I think could be the best tight end combination in the league. You know, falling into that run blocking game or just getting loose. You know, you mentioned Andrews being a touchdown machine. The one thing I'd wonder is how much of a loss Zay Flowers is going to be in, I suppose, not just opening up the long ball game for them, but I suppose taking away that air of unpredictability. Like, Zay Flowers is a Pro Bowl receiver. This year he's 1,000 yards. You know, he's well over the 1,000 yards. I know Rashad Bateman is a capable weapon himself, but I just wonder. First
time the Ravens have ever sent a receiver to the Pro Bowl and he gets injured. It's so unfortunate.
It's amazing, yeah. But look, you'd hope, and I do think the Ravens will have enough to get over the line. But going forward, you know, we talked about you want to see the Ravens being a Super Bowl contender. I think they have all the pieces, and I do think Henry is the last piece of the puzzle. But if they advance, you'd like to see Zay Flowers, and they'd like to see Zay Flowers coming back into the mix as well, just to make that package all the stronger.
Right, 6:00 game on Sunday, Noel, is at Orchard Park Stadium, where the Bills host the Broncos in New York. The Bills favoured at home by 8.5 points, alongside the Ravens, the most heavily favoured teams in the wild card round this weekend. The Bills in the playoffs are able to take care of just about everyone that's not Cincinnati or Kansas City. Since 2015, the Bills are 0-5 against either Cincinnati or Kansas City, and they're, like, I think 5-2 against everybody else. Everybody else would potentially include the Broncos, who obviously haven't been to the playoffs since they last won the Super Bowl. And, you know, the kind of dismissive air around the Broncos is sure they're just happy to be there. Rookie quarterback, delighted to be taking part. I don't think that Sean Payton for 1 second is seeing it that way. He'll see this as pressure off. We've got absolutely nothing to lose. Is that going to be enough, though, to cause an upset in New York?
Don't think so. I think this Bills team are playing with a purpose this season. I had a lot of question marks about them when the season started. They'd made a lot of changes. But look, one thing I did say, when you have Josh Allen there, anything is possible. And I think Josh Allen has been phenomenal this year. I think for me, he's my MVP. I know if you measure him up stats-wise, he comes behind Lamar in almost every stat. But that's not it. That's not everything that's into it. It's how he carries this team. I think in terms of weapons, Lamar has much more around him. We talked about Zay Flowers and Andrews and Henry. I don't think Josh Allen has those players, but he has good enough players that he's able to raise their game to that next level. And that's what he's done all season. You mentioned the Broncos and obviously the season they've had, which is a season that nobody saw coming, I don't think. We look at a rookie quarterback again. There was questions about Bo Nix playing in there, but everybody, said maybe he's a Sean Payton quarterback, and that's what he wanted. I had kind of worries about him at the start of the season. I thought he put a lot on him, but he seemed to come true. But I just think this Broncos team, they're really good on defense. They have shown some good things on offense, but they're still questionable there for me. I think a Bills team that's just stronger. But I agree with you. Sean Payton will be saying, look, we're here. It is one and done. Anything can happen. If we catch Josh Allen on a bad night, we can look to exploit that. We have the defense to exploit that. And Bo Nix can, on his day and on his game, he can hurt teams. We've seen it. He has a big arm and he has mobile feet when he needs to run as well. So I think this is going to be an interesting game. But I just think overall the experience with the Bills and Josh Allen really puts them head and shoulders above. But I think for the Broncos, they can go in there, they can gain this experience, hopefully bring it with them next season. But I think for me, it's the Bills this weekend. Just will be too strong. Josh Allen is just really carrying. I don't mean that in bad way to all his other players, but he really is a man in a mission this season, and he's really pushing this team forward.
With the possible exception of Sean McVay versus Brian Flores, Kieran, I think this one has one of the more intriguing coordinator matchups here on both sides of the ball, where you've got Joe Brady, Bills offensive coordinator, up against Vance Joseph at Denver. Two guys at the top of their game. Joe Brady getting a lot of head coaching interest this offseason because that Bills team notched an NFL record this year. You want to talk about balance and complementary football. First team in NFL history to score more than 30 touchdowns through the air and more than 30 on the ground. James Cook alone accounting for 16 touchdowns. Not all of those on the ground either. So, we talked about Gabe Davis heading out the door and Stephon Diggs and heading out the door. Who's Josh Allen going to be throwing the ball to? But Brady has put together a masterclass in how to spread it around. They're not reliant on any one superstar to get them where they need to go. And that makes them perversely all the more dangerous.
Yeah, and Josh Allen was asked again during the week, what kind of a difference has Joe Brady made? And he said absolutely nothing. Leave him alone. Don't give him a call this offseason. So he'll be hoping that the team stays together. But you're absolutely right. That was the talk. Like last year, once Diggs was out the door, who's he going to throw to? Everyone expected most people that I would have spoken to expected the Bills to regress this season. Nobody would have seen the step forward or the leap forward that they've taken. And a huge amount of credit must go to Joe Brady. And the offense that he's been able to build. Now, give props to Josh Allen as well. The one weakness in his game, the one knock on his game was his tendency to turn the ball over, and he's gone out and really consciously addressed that as well. And that's turned this Bills into an absolutely super team. So, and you talk about the Bills or the Broncos defense as well. They're a top 10 defense. They're 7th overall. I think they're third against the rush. So if they can take James Cook out of the game slightly or limit him, they'll give themselves hope as well. So no, absolutely. I think both coordinators, offensively and defensively, on both sides, on both teams, need to take a huge amount of credit, and that's must be the difficult thing for a team to keep them focused going into the playoffs, with one eye on whose phone is going to be ringing at the end of the season. It must be tough enough at times to concentrate and to focus. But obviously they've got a job at hand this weekend, and I'm sure they'll be able to block out the noise for the time being anyway.
Sure, look, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about when you're a coordinator. Brian, you build success from the inside out in the NFL. We've seen it over and over again. The Philadelphia Eagles in recent seasons were always the ones getting the plaudits, and Howie Roseman for putting big guys, strong horses in the trenches on both sides, and that's shoring up everything and paving the foundation for all the success that followed. And that's exactly what the Broncos have done, because they've done a great job in protecting Bo Nix this year. They're top 5 in terms of pressure rate allowed, and I think they're lowest or top 3 in fewest sacks allowed. And yet on the other side of the ball, They're top 5 in sacks. They're top 5 in pressure rates, and that's put them in a position where they have a chance to win pretty much every game. We were talking about Sean Payton potentially being on the hot seat this year. Instead, he's heading into the playoffs with nothing to lose.
Yeah, and it feels like a bit of a tale of two seasons in a way, because when they were, I suppose, finding their feet with a new quarterback, their defense was all keeping them in games, and they were finding ways to navigate victories. But if you look at the second half of the season in terms of how Bo Nix has played, and he's gradually kind of got up to speed around what the expectation is from Sean Payton, what his offense game plan is all about. The numbers in which they put up is startling in terms of the points, and the numbers in terms of his quarterback play, yards, touchdowns, even his running ability. He kind of reminds me in a way of Josh Allen and what we saw, a younger Josh Allen. Obviously, you have to kind of fend that off in terms of making sure he's not doing silly plays. We saw some, needless interceptions at times over the course of the season, but it has been a great relief for Broncos fans to finally look like they found the quarterback. I'm cautious around how we kind of play that, because you don't want to put too much on a player, because we've seen in the past CJ Stroud this year is kind of, I wouldn't say he's dropped back a bit. He's obviously had his own kind of issues there in terms of offensive line. But the numbers over the course of the last few weeks, despite the fact that they'd lost games, they've been putting up 24 minimum points, like 24, 27, 31. Like, I can see a shootout type of game here. I can see them going toe-to-toe with the Bills for large parts if they can get it right. And even a scenario where if their defense can get a...
I think the over-under here is, 47.5 from memory. That could be under threat, I think. You might want to bang the over there if you're looking at that one.
It's a high number, for bearing in mind the weather that's forecasted over the course of the weekend, that they're still sticking with a 47 number. It kind of tells you what the Quinn bets of this world expect, that they expect that we're going to see points galore, and not necessarily all coming from one side. I think ultimately, as you've alluded to, it's going to come down to what Josh Allen is there on Sunday. We've seen Josh Allen over the course of the last few weeks kind of start slowly, and it takes a while for him to get up to speed, and they've been playing against lesser opponents, so they found their way back, like the Patriots game in particular. They're down by 2 scores early. If the Broncos can get up on them, it'd be interesting to see if they can claw it back, because then ultimately you're going to rely on that Broncos defense to pin their ears and go after Josh Allen, and that makes for a really interesting game. I don't think this is as a foregone conclusion as many seem. Like, an 8.5 point spread for me is quite high in this game. I think the Broncos have a real opportunity here. We're talking about, I know we didn't really get into the devil in detail on Monday's show and where shocks could happen. If there's an AFC shock for me, this could be the one.
Okay, interesting. As you say, 8.5 points is a big spread for the playoffs, full stop, particularly in an outdoor game played in the cold weather. We shall see whether it pans out that way when that game takes place on Sunday evening. That brings us to an end of the AFC side of the bracket. We'll talk NFC next. It is Super Wildcard weekend. We are looking at the NFC side of the bracket now from Sunday at 9:30. The Packers head to the Eagles. Kieran, your beloved Cheeseheads. Chance to get revenge against Philly. 2 very different teams to the teams that lined out, in a very different venue, of course, as well, because that first game was in Sao Paulo. This one is going to be at the Link. A difficult place to go in the winter, vociferous home support, although, Green Bay obviously travel well as well. So that's going to be some atmosphere, I think, probably one of the most raucous places to be at the weekend. And the Eagles are 5-point favorites. We saw Jordan Love take a bit of a knock at the weekend, although it seems like he'll be okay. Christian Watson, though, on the other hand, unfortunately, down with an ACL in the final regular season game against the Bears. That is going to hurt the Packers, although maybe not as much as you might think, given how well Matt LaFleur has been able to spread that offense and run it through different directions. Again, though, this game on both sides of the ball, I think, is going to be very much defined by who can run the ball well.
Yeah, and I mentioned before we came on air that I was thinking about wearing my Packers jersey, because I feel like it might be the last opportunity I get this season, unfortunately. It's the feeling isn't good in the Packers, in Packers Nation at the moment. I think they've regressed a lot over the last couple of weeks, and they've thrown up more questions than answers. I know we talk about Jordan Love's injury and the potential for it to affect him, but even before that, you're dead right. I think if the Packers are to have any success, they have to A, have success running the ball through Josh Jacobs, and B, limit the run, and try and limit the effectiveness of Saquon Barkley on the other side of the ball, and then maybe dare Jalen Hurts to get the ball down the field. But just, you talked about Matt LaFleur and his ability to scheme fellas open. That hasn't been happening in the last few weeks from what I've seen, and I don't know. I wonder the more that they've leaned on Josh Jacobs, has it maybe affected Jordan Love's confidence as a leader, or his consistency, or his ability to get to, I suppose, to take control of that offense? Because we talked about an awful lot about the variety of wide receivers they've had in Heath and Dontavian Wicks and Romeo Dobbs, who's had a productive season and looks like it could be their number one going forward. Jaden Reed as well, Tucker Kraft. But the last few weeks they've been stuttering and they've had drop balls, and they've struggled to get a level of consistency that you'd want. And I think confidence level is pretty low at the moment. And again, what would give you hope is the run game, a stout run game, if they can get that going on the ground, get out to an early lead, and it's the turnover game as well. The one thing that, the stat that I'm looking at for the Packers to just give us a little bit of hope is 17 interceptions. That's third in the league. 31 takeaways. That's fourth in the league. And Jalen Hurts, who in his own right is going to be rusty, still not fully, he's not a full participant in training. I think he was redshirting today. If you can limit Saquon Barkley early on and force Jalen Hurts to throw the ball, maybe you get a pick early on, maybe you get out to a lead or two, and put the Eagles off kilter. That's the way I give them some bit of hope. But look, you talk about shocks. I think if there's to be a shock, I think this would be the biggest one of the weekend if the Packers were to win.
No, we saw this weekend last year the Packers deliver shock when they turned over the Cowboys at Arlington and ruined my perfect playoff prediction record in the process. Went 12-1 after that, as I think I probably mentioned every single show. I'm still bitter about it. But as Kieran was saying there, key for the Eagles all season has been how well they've run the ball, and Saquon for over 2,000 yards, as we've seen. They are the team that runs the ball most often of any team in the league. They're the lowest pass rate of any team in the league, which doesn't generally tend to be the way to succeed in the modern NFL. You don't run to win, you run when you're winning for the most part. The Eagles have kind of turned that on its head a little bit, and as Kieran said, what you want to do is force Jalen Hurts to put the ball under threat to you, where you have your Xavier McKinneys and your Keyshawn Nixons hanging around to pick up anything loose or anything that gets tipped, because otherwise if the Eagles get rolling, they're difficult to stop. No, I think you're on mute there.
Apologies for that. And that was a really good thing I said. I can't even repeat it again. It was that good. But yeah, no, look, you look at that run game, obviously Saquon Barkley, he has the season he has. He goes for 2,000 yards. We talk about Henry at the Ravens and how that could be a final piece for them. Well, it looks like Barkley is a very, very big piece for this Eagles offense. Hurts himself dead. He adds a lot of rushing touchdowns in there. So they really are potent. And I think Kieran is spot on. I think this Packers team really needs to try and work on that run game and force Jalen Hurts to try and beat them that way. Now, again, they have really good players out there. Devontae Smith is a good player. AJ Brown. I mean, they have weapons there. So it's not like you're forcing them into a bad section of the team. They're still a good team there. They're still productive. But the run game is their bread and butter. And if you can force a Jalen Hurts, who is coming back from the injury, who we don't know how he's going to, is he fully fit? Is he fully there? He's going to play in the playoffs because it's the playoffs. But yeah, if they can put pressure on Hurts, see how fit he is, and if he's fully there, and they can somehow slow down that run, then a young team like this Packers team, who have young, exciting players, I think I've been really impressed with Tucker Kraft this year. I mean, Josh Jacobs, obviously, he's been talked about. He's been carrying that team and in the run game. And then they have interesting players in Dubs and Reed who can step up and make a big play when needed. And as you said, Connor, last year, nobody saw that Cowboys game coming. This young team, kind of surprise them. Now, maybe they've lost that element of surprise this year. People will, know a little bit more about this young team. But I still think overall the Eagles will be too strong. But it's not out of the Packers' reach if they can come out there and have a good game, that they can cause a surprise. But a lot of that as well will be on Jordan Love. I've not been the biggest fan of Jordan Love this year. I look at the contract he got. I think that's more a reference of where the quarterback market is and how important it is these days that you have to pay that young quarterback to stay. I think he needed a bit more experience to kind of get to that level. But that's just the way the contract fell. So for me, I think he really needs to win his game as well. And the Packers defense do. So it's possible, but I think the Eagles might be too strong.
Brian, a slightly tough watch this weekend for Giants fans, where you've got two players who left in the offseason, Saquon and Xavier McKinney, both starring on opposite sides of that particular game. Yeah,
it's heartbreaking in a way, Connor, because there are two fantastic talents in their own right, and fortunately the Giants fell into a situation where they couldn't even keep one of them, never mind both of them. I read some really great stuff on Saquon Barkley this week from both sides, really, the Giants side and the Eagles. And one of the things that was very telling for Giants players on Monday when they were wrapping up was they lost. It wasn't so much about the skill set which Saquon Barkley brought to the team. It was the factor in the locker room, how he is around players. Players look up to him. And then you read an article in Philadelphia's local press around a couple of four or 5 weeks ago, there was these conversations with players arguing in the locker room, and by all accounts, Saquon Barkley is the one that went around talking to all these players and saying, you don't realize how good we have it and what an opportunity we have, because I've just come from a team that hasn't won for 6 or 7 years. And he went, and by all accounts, since that particular situation where he went and spoke to players individually, that's all kind of come together. It just kind of goes to show the magnitude of what they got there. It's not just about the players, it's the attitude that comes with it. And look, I will be jealous to see him playing the playoffs for the Eagles on Sunday, but ultimately I would like to see him have a good end to the season without actually winning the Super Bowl. But we haven't even spoken about the Eagles defense. The Eagles defense over the course of the season, question marks going into the season, a very good, shrewd selection of players in the draft. They've all stepped up. They've all kind of come together, a nice transition in the secondary, and that's the telling point as well.
They drafted brilliantly, in fairness to them. I think we said it at the time, like they went into the draft with a clear plan. They picked up guys, they got value picks, they addressed the issues in their secondary, and they got 2 starters out of it. Like, what more do you want?
And I often think back to when we did that draft recap, Connor and Kieran, the other Kieran who's in here, we know, like, he's lights ahead of us in terms of his skill set when it comes to assessing college games. He watches so much college content. He said on that particular show, and he's been proven right, the players that they took in that draft will ultimately be huge players over the course of the season. I think he even had won them for his defensive player of the year, and he's not far off the mark in terms of the rookie player of the year. So look, this is going to be a huge task for the Packers. A part of me still feels that they'll give it a great go. I don't think it's going to be a foregone conclusion, but I think it's very much going to be similar kind of conversation and scenario that ultimately everybody feels is that they'll play well, they'll play tough, but ultimately come the fourth quarter, the Eagles will pull away. We also haven't factored in Jalen Hurts hasn't played for a couple of weeks. He is coming back off a concussion. I don't think we should underrate the situation is there. We're expecting him to fit right in immediately. It could be a slow burner initially to see how he plays, and maybe the Packers can get on the right side of it and build, and that's the way to progress and get a victory. But ultimately, I think it's too big an ask as well. I think the Eagles are coming out the right side of this one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think the Eagles are going to win the Super Bowl this year. I don't ultimately trust Nick Sirianni, however much of a benefit Saquon Barkley has been in that locker room. But I don't think this is the week where they come unstuck. It's Eagles for me. Kieran, I think you were leaning Eagles as well. I didn't tie you to the mass for a pick, but can we put you on the spot now?
Yeah, Eagles, and I hope I'm wrong. I'd be delighted.
I know.
Yeah, Eagles for me as well, and I hope I'm right because I'll also be delighted.
All right, on to Tampa we move, where the Commanders take on the Bucs. Bucs favourite at home by 3 points here, Brian, and they've been valued, the Bucs, this season. You know, we talk about the NFC South being soft, but Bucs are coming into this having won 6 of their last 7 games. Top 5 offense. They also haven't been shy on the defensive side of the ball. This is sneakily quite a good team, dare I say it.
I have my doubts on this one, Connor. I think we said it on Monday around, which again, potential slip-ups for the weekend. This is a rerun of week 1, and we saw Jaden Daniels play really effective in that game, but ultimately came up short, and the Bucs put up a huge amount of points on that Commanders defense. But that Commanders defense over the course of the season has kind of come together, and Noel has done a very good podcast with Ben Stanley, and I think even on that particular piece he talks about the experienced players, in which Dan Quinn acknowledged and recognised as players that could come in and understand the nature of trying to put this all back together. This team are on a good bit of a run, as you say, and Commanders, and even last weekend once they're playing against the Cowboys backup team, the kind of the nature of how they came out the right side of it, and the celebration on the sideline looks like a team that are very much believing in themselves and go into Tampa and potentially cause a shock.
What way do you see this one, Noel? Because, there's plenty of reasons to believe from a Commander's point of view. We talked about the Broncos earlier, one of the other teams putting their faith in a rookie quarterback, and it's paid off in spades. For the Commanders, they've got Scary Terry finally getting the kind of service that he's always deserved in the league and hitting his 1,000 yards. Zach Ertz, a really reliable option at tight end. Austin Eckler's been very, very versatile for them. It was a good pickup. They're a well-coached team. They're a team that has momentum. They won't be going into Tampa looking to make up the numbers. They'll be feeling that not only have they been good enough to make the playoffs, but they can get to that divisional round.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a team that all season has grown. I mean, I remember in the off season when we looked at the moves they made a lot of moves on this team. And for me, I was positive about the moves. I thought they brought in a lot of experienced players who could help kind of stabilize a team that over the last number of years had, there'd been a lot going on and a lot of issues. And I thought Dan Quinn did a good job, and Peters there did a good job of bringing in players who could just stabilize things and settle it down and kind of build from there. Well, these experienced players have come in and they've meshed, especially on offense with this young rookie quarterback. And, with Cliff Kingsbury there, they have really gone for that offense. There's times when this offense has looked electric. You mentioned some of the names. I mean, Terry McLaurin and Jalen Daniels seem to have really come together and had a good connection. And they are making some really, really big plays. And this Commanders team will go to the Buccaneers. They'll look at week one, as mentioned by Brian. I interviewed Ben Standig today from The Athletic, who covers the Commanders, and as he said in his words, week one has no impact on this game. This is a different Commanders team. It was week one with a rookie quarterback. Excuse me. They've really built up. And one of the important keys that we talked about was Tyler Biadasz at center, and what a difference it has made to them to have an experienced, good center in there who can really take charge of that line and work with that quarterback. And I mean, I think this Commanders offense can really go into this weekend positive. Now, we look at the Buccaneers, they're the home team. They won that week one. They'll be confident. Baker Mayfield is playing out of his mind at the moment. Bucky Irvine is having a really, really good season. And then we look at Mike Evans, who got his 11th 1,000-yard season in a row, which is phenomenal for any player. And even they'll look at that. And I'm sorry, Jalen McMillan has 7 touchdowns in the last 5 games after a kind of a quiet stretch. So these are two offenses that can really put it up to each other. And it's going to be interesting to see which defense can maybe step up and slow it down. But for me, I like the Commanders. I like the form they're in. They've won a lot of games late in, with a minute left, with 6 seconds left, with 10 seconds left. And, 1 or 2 you can say is lucky. But 3, 4, you're starting to think maybe they have a drive about this team. They don't know when they're finished. They don't know when they're done. And I think that's going to push them over the line this weekend. I think they'll avenge that week 1 defeat. I think this offense, has a lot in there that can cause problems for the Bucs. And I think they'll get a good win.
Hey, interesting that you're both leaning Commanders in this one. I got to say, I think it's just a big ask for a rookie quarterback to go and win his very first playoff game on the road. I think that's a lot to ask of Jaden Daniels, as well as he's played this season. And also, we haven't even mentioned 900 yards on the ground. He's the leading rusher for a Commanders team that also has Brian Robinson, of course, and has a pretty balanced running game, even without the quarterback taking off. I just think the Bucs are a team that we tend to sleep on. This team has Super Bowl experience still in its ranks. They won a playoff game last year before they fell to the Detroit Lions in the divisional round. That counts for a lot. Regular season is regular season. You put it to bed. As feel good as it's been for the Commanders, and I think we'd all love to see them progress for many reasons. And it gives hope to the hopeless. And 3 of the 4 of us on this podcast fall into the category of the hopeless. I think it's a little bit too much. I think there's a reason the Bucs are favoured. They're playing at home. I think they'll progress to the divisional round. Kieran.
Yeah, I think this could sneakily be the game of the weekend. I'm really looking forward to it. As late as it is, and as tired as we're going to be the following morning.
Well, it has shootout written all over it, and it's one of the games that at least takes place in decent weather.
Yeah, and you've got Jaden Daniels there. He's thrown at least 2 touchdowns in the last 5 games. You've talked about his ground game. I won't say he's at the Lamar levels, but he's been Lamar-esque at times in his showing his escapability and his clutch plays. His ability to put the team on his back when it needed to happen. These guys weren't guaranteed a playoff spot a couple of weeks ago. And they had to come out of a bit of a mid-season slump, and they kind of restored our faith in them, for want of a better term. And then you look on the other side, Baker has just been clutch all season. For better or for worse, you're going to get the best Baker moments, that you're going to get the good and the bad. You look last week, I know they weren't up against much again, with the Saints, but the Saints played them hard. They've been playing for Rizzy ever since he took over, and essentially last week was a playoff game for the Bucs. And when they were down and when they absolutely had to have it, Baker went long to Jalen McMillan, who I'm glad you mentioned, Noel. I've been harping on about him the last couple of weeks, and I think he's been a real clutch performer for them. He got up, he made that rookie mistake of making getting a 15-yard penalty for a inappropriate celebration, and they went straight back to him in the corner for a touchdown. That shows big game mentality, and it shows faith from the quarterback, and it shows good harmony between the receivers. He's not looking, he's not forcing Mike Evans into situations, forcing double coverage, triple coverage. He's showing the defenses, look, I've got other receivers. I'm happy to spread the ball around here. And you mentioned Bucky Irving and Rashad White as well on the ground. You've got stars all over the pitch here for a really, really exciting game, and I'm looking forward to it. But when push comes to shove, I agree with you, Connor. I think experience will tell, and as long as they can avoid, maybe multiple turnovers, I think the Bucs will edge it. But it's a coin flip game for me.
Right, final game of the weekend, which takes place after the weekend. Of course, it's Tuesday morning by the time it rolls around here. 1:15, the Rams will kick off against the Vikings. Venue there, as we were saying at the top of the show, still to be confirmed because of the wildfires currently, unfortunately, raging all around LA and the surrounding area. It looks to be the case potentially that the Rams will be denied home field advantage there, and that'll be moved to a neutral venue. Glendale, Arizona, home of the Arizona Cardinals, would be the option there, according to the NFL. Despite that, Noel, the Rams weren't favoured at home anyway. The Vikings are the 2-point favourites here. It's a tight spread. It's a field goal game, according to our partners, QuinnBet. One of the things that probably we talked about at length on Monday and was a factor for a lot of people in the Vikings home closer against the Lions, where the number 1 seed was up for grabs, and the game that ultimately determines that they would go on the road to the Rams rather than getting a bye, was the performance of Sam Darnold. And that Vikings offense really laid an egg last weekend against a depleted Detroit defense. That can't happen this weekend, otherwise the Vikings are going to be heading home.
No, absolutely not. I was listening to the podcast, and you're right. The questions were there about the Sam Darnold performance. I mean, and this is a question that's popped up intermittently all through the season. When is Sam Darnold going to revert back to Sam Darnold? And then we got this game against the Lions, a big game, everything on the line. You go from potentially a week off and the number 1 seed to traveling to, well, maybe not LA now, but to traveling away to the Rams. And it's a big difference. And that is going to be a big
there's no disgrace in losing the game, right? It's that Detroit team is a tough out any given week, but 9 points. Open throws missed, one particularly glaring one to Justin Jefferson, best receiver in the league, arguably, when he's wide open in the end zone. It's just not a good look, and what effectively was a playoff game when it was all there. No, couldn't get it done.
Absolutely. I mean, look, almost everybody's lost to the Lions this season. That's not a thing, but it's how they lost and it's how they played. And you're spot on. And this could come down to the quarterbacks. We have a hugely experienced Matt Stafford who has a multitude of weapons around him. Corryn Williams is good on the ground, but then you've got Nakua and Kupp. These are players that are really, really explosive and can put points up. So you would think if I'm losing me train of thought here now. If Matthew Stafford, apologies, is on form, that this Rams offense is going to really put up the points, and that's where Sam Darnold cannot have another game like he had last weekend. I mean, at the end of the day, I think he only completed 18 of 41 passes, which is not good enough. And again, it's the nature of those incompletions. They were high, they were low, they were wide. It's one of those things where you kind of do look at his history and you step back and you say, right, is he reverting to type, or is this a one-off? And it is important for the Vikings that it's a one-off, because I do. This is my game this weekend where I've been back and forth on both teams, and I have reasons for both teams to win. I look at that Rams, that front seven of the Rams defense, so they can really, really cause problems. I look at the Brian Flores defense, equally, they can cause problems. So it comes down for me to do these two quarterbacks and these offenses. I think last week was just a bad week for Sam Darnold. I give him the benefit of the doubt. I think this Vikings team is still just a little too strong for a Rams team who have impressed me this year. Through injury, they were 1-4 at one point, and it's a tough slog for them to battle back, and they did it because they have good players there. But I just think this Vikings team is a little too strong. I think last week was just a bad week against a good team. And I think this week they'll put it behind them and they'll win what I think will be the best game of the weekend, and should be a fairly close one as well. I don't think they'll dominate.
Yeah, I agree with you, Noel. I think it probably will be the game of the weekend. It's certainly the one that I'm looking forward to most. It's a pity that it's in the time slot that it's in from our perspective, but it's just fascinating no matter what way you look at it, because of how well the Vikings have played, both on offense and defense this year, because of what we saw last weekend from Darnold. A lot of question marks, and you're wondering, can he step up in that big spot? And also because of, as you say, how grittily the Rams have dug their way through this season, how they coped with the injuries early on, how they came back from that 1-4 hole, how they managed to compensate for their deficiencies, but also the question marks over them coming into this game. We're not really sure what version of the Rams that we're going to see, because they've had to lean on their defense the last few weeks. And for all that we talk about Sean McVay's scheme, and for all that we talk about Matt Stafford and the weapons that they have, and what an absolute revelation Puka Nacua has been. You got Cooper Kupp back, although he hasn't had a lot of targets in recent weeks. You've got Kyron Williams, who put up over 1,000 yards this season and has been sensational for them. But they've really struggled to put up points the last few weeks. You can scrub last week's outing because it was the replacements quarterback by Jimmy G. But it's no guarantee that they come in firing on the cylinders that they were in the early parts of the season, or in the mid parts of the season, I should say, when they got their players back. But they found ways to win. As I was saying with the other game we were talking about, where not necessarily sure I trust the rookie quarterback in Jaden Daniels to go in and win his first big playoff game on the road. I think it's a tough ask for Darnold against such an experienced Rams team, a team with Super Bowl rings, a team with a quarterback that's been there and done it all. And also, no more than the Vikings. And we saw Dan Campbell shaking hands with Kevin O'Connell at the end of that game last week, clapping him on the back and saying, "I'll see you in 2 weeks." I think Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay would have something to say about that. They want another shot at the Lions. They're upset about the way their season finished last year. They want to go to Detroit and rub their noses in it. No more than the Vikings would like another crack at them, the Rams would like another crack at them. And I think the Rams will actually get that shot. Kieran, how do you see it? You've seen the Vikings twice this season, as we have in Chicago. They've been mightily impressive.
Yeah, they have, in fairness. And an awful lot is being made on last week's performance. And poor old Sam Darnold. I think people were waiting for that performance all season long, and it's such a shame for him that it came at the last weekend. And it does look, when you're a quarterback in this league, you are under the microscope, and everything is magnified. And he does have a point to prove now going out this week. He can only blame himself for a lot of those overthrows. You'd like to think from his perspective, or if you're a Sam Darnold fan, that it is an anomaly rather than him reverting to form or him reverting to type. Look, I flip-flopped over this game a number of times. When the Packers were playing him a few weeks ago, I mentioned the Vikings, and they now have the 28th pass defense. And when you look at the Rams, if they can get Kupp and if they can get Nacua going, that's a scary concept. Matt Stafford and Sean McVay and Cooper Kupp, they bring playoff pedigree into these playoffs, and that counts for something as well. The problem is, as you mentioned, ever since that Bills game, that high-flying, high-scoring Bills game, they've stuttered and they've stalled. And you're dead right. They've leaned on their defense and special teams, and they've been kicking their way to victory. And it's not a foregone conclusion that the Rams are going to roll up here and steamroll the Vikings, because, like, as I said, I've gone back and forth a number of times on this, but if I look at it top to bottom, the Vikings are still the better team. Brian Flores is going to send a lot of pressure. He's going to do a lot to put Stafford off his game. And Justin Jefferson is going to be the best player on the pitch if Sam Darnold can get the ball to him. And you look at coach, quarterback. Maybe Sam Darnold has now dropped behind Stafford in that ranking. But the Vikings are a very well coached team as well. And I think, as I said, top to bottom, I think they're a better team on paper. And I think they'll do enough to restore faith and to get over the line.
As Kieran said, Brian Flores has a point to prove coming into this game. A guy that's won a lot of plaudits over the last couple of seasons for how he's transformed that Vikings defense and made them one of the most feared units in the league. It didn't go well in Detroit when they sent all sorts of exotic pressure after Jared Goff, and he just picked them apart. He found his options. He found the weak spots, and he found the empty slots where they were rushing people at him and tore them up. But that Rams offense is a different beast, as Kieran was saying, and it hasn't necessarily been the formidable beast that you might expect when you look at it on paper.
Yeah, you kind of stole my thunder. I was going to refer to the fact that no touchdown against the Niners, 1 touchdown the following week against a struggling Jets team, 1 touchdown against a struggling Cardinals team. Just about came out the right side of it. I think, with all due respect to the Vikings, as poor as they played last weekend, like there's been many a team this year that's gone into Detroit and got rolled, and no matter who the defensive coordinator is in place and in situ for whatever team. And we also have a scenario where they got, once they got rolled, they lost by a field goal the first time around in Minnesota. So look, the Lions have had the Vikings number both offensively and defensively. So I think like a part of the game plan this week, we have to put that one aside. Like maybe we will get that other opportunity to right the wrong. But people have all week have been suggesting, will McVay beat Kevin O'Connell previously this season? I think it was week 8. It was a Thursday night game. We've seen so many times in the NFL over the course of the years that the coach gets another opportunity and he rights the wrongs and gets it right the second time around. That's how it feels for me. I think as poorly as they played offensively last week, I think the Vikings will have more than enough in this game to get it over the line, whether it's in SoFi or whether they have to move it off to Glendale and play it in Arizona. I think the Vikings have had a great season. I think we've kind of got away from that this week because of the nature of how poor they played last Sunday, but I think ultimately they're a much more well-rounded team. And the Rams have struggled early on in the season, got it back on track and struggled late on. And we're talking earlier on in the show about can teams get it right offensively after having a poor December. The Rams are in that situation as well. It's not a foregone conclusion they're going to come out and necessarily steamroll as Vikings or have a high-scoring game. I'm going with the Vikings. I think as exciting as this game seems, I think this could be one where the Vikings find it a little bit more comfortable than people suspect.
All right, that brings us to the end of our Super Wildcard Weekend preview. We've lots more content coming your way, though, as we talk to beat writers around the league and get their take on all of the individual battles and how they see their teams doing. We'll have a live reaction show on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. We're also back on Monday evening to discuss all the weekend's games, and we'll give our final thoughts before that Monday night game and see whether we're sticking or twisting at that point, and whether we've changed our minds over the weekend on our picks before we go into that final game of Super Wildcard Weekend and set the table for the divisional rounds the following week.